She wasn't looking for a man, especially not one who might actually see her worth. But when a new ranch foreman rides into town, Emma Walker's world begins to shift in ways she never expected. What happens when a woman who's always stood alone meets a man who doesn't want to tame her, but ride beside her? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. Emma Walker stood at the edge of her father's property, watching the morning sun cast long shadows across the rolling Montana plains. At 23, she had earned quite the reputation in the small town of Pinecrest. Too wild, they called her. Unmarriageable, they whispered. All because she preferred riding astride instead of side saddle, could outshoot most men in the county, and had no interest in afternoon teas or the latest fashions from back east. Emma! Her father's voice carried across the yard. The cattle need moving to the north pasture. Coming, Pa. She called back, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat. Unlike the other young women in town who shielded their skin from the sun, Emma wore her sun-kissed complexion like a badge of honor. Thomas Walker watched his daughter stride toward him, her confident gait so unlike the delicate steps of other women her age. As a widower who had raised Emma alone since she was 12, he'd allowed her freedoms other fathers would consider scandalous. But necessity had required it. Their small ranch needed all hands working, regardless of gender. The Jackson outfit will be moving their herd through the valley today, Thomas mentioned as Emma approached. Their new foreman might stop by to discuss water rights. Emma nodded, though inwardly she sighed. The Jacksons owned the largest ranch in the county, and their previous foreman had been one of the many men who looked at her with either disapproval or unwanted interest. I'll be civil if he is, she promised, mounting her chestnut mare with practiced ease. That's my girl, Thomas chuckled. Just try not to challenge him to a shooting match before introductions are made. Emma flashed a smile. No promises, Pa. The work of moving cattle was second nature to Emma. She guided her horse with subtle pressure from her knees, whistling commands to the cattle dog that worked alongside her. The morning passed quickly, and by midday, the herd was settled in the north pasture with access to the creek that ran through the property. She dismounted by the water's edge, allowing her horse to drink while she splashed cool water on her face. That's when she heard it, the steady rhythm of approaching HOOFBEATS. Emma stood, hand instinctively moving to the pistol at her hip, though she relaxed slightly when she saw only one rider approaching. Tall and broad-shouldered, the man sat, his horse with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. That's far enough, Emma called when he was within earshot. State your business. The rider pulled his horse to a stop, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. Name's Matthew Reed, new foreman at the Jackson Ranch. I'm looking for Thomas Walker. I'm his daughter, Emma Walker. Matthew Reed studied her for a moment, taking in her practical trousers, worn boots, and the gun at her hip. If he was surprised, he didn't show it. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Walker. Your father around? He's back at the house, Emma replied, measuring the man with her gaze. Unlike others who often looked at her with judgment, Matthew's expression remained neutral, professional. I can take you to him, she offered, mounting her horse in one fluid motion. As they rode side by side, Emma found herself stealing glances at the newcomer. His face was weathered from years under the sun, but she guessed he wasn't much older than 30. His clothes were practical, dusty from the trail, but well maintained. You're new to these parts, Emma commented, breaking the silence. Matthew nodded. Came up from Wyoming about a month ago. Mr. Jackson hired me after his last foreman moved back east. And what do you think of Pinecrest so far? A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. Small town, big opinions. Emma couldn't help but laugh. You figured that out quickly. Hard not to, he replied. Especially when half the conversations at the saloon seemed to revolve around the unmarriageable Walker girl who rides like a man. Emma's laughter died abruptly. Is that so? Matthew seemed to realize his mistake. I didn't mean. No need to explain. Emma cut him off, her voice cooling. "I'm well aware of my reputation in town." They rode the rest of the way in uncomfortable silence. When they reached the modest Walker homestead, Thomas was repairing a fence post near the barn. "Pa," Emma called out. "Matthew Reed from the Jackson Ranch is here to see you." Thomas straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers before extending one to Matthew. "Thomas Walker, heard Jackson brought in new blood." "Pleasure to meet you, sir," Matthew replied, dismounting. "Mr. Jackson sent me to discuss the water access during the dry season. With both our herds growing, he wants to ensure we have a clear agreement." "Sensible," Thomas nodded. "Emma, would you put on some coffee while Mr. Reed and I talk business?" Emma bristled at being dismissed to perform a household task, but knew better than to argue in front of a stranger. "Of course, Pa." As she walked toward the house, she heard Matthew say, "You've got quite the capable daughter, Mr. Walker." "That I do," her father responded with pride in his voice. "Though it's cost her in other ways." Inside the kitchen, Emma worked the pump handle with more force than necessary, filling the coffee pot while muttering under her breath. Always the same story, admired for her abilities, but pitied for how they made her unsuitable as a wife. Through the window, she watched her father and Matthew talking, their gestures suggesting they were discussing property boundaries. There was something different about the way Matthew carried himself, a quiet confidence without the swagger so many men in these parts adopted. When she brought the coffee out to the porch, the men had moved on to discussing cattle prices and the upcoming season. "The way I see it," Matthew was saying, "both our ranches benefit from cooperation. The Jacksons have the size, but your bloodlines produce hardier stock." Thomas nodded appreciatively. "Refreshing perspective. Your predecessor was more interested in throwing his weight around." "Never saw the sense in that approach," Matthew replied, accepting the cup Emma offered. "Thank you, Miss Walker." Their eyes met briefly, and Emma was surprised to find genuine respect in his gaze, not the usual condescension or discomfort. "I was just telling your father that I noticed your technique with the cattle dog earlier. Impressive work." Emma raised an eyebrow. "You were watching me?" "Professional interest," Matthew clarified. "Good hands are hard to find, regardless of whether they're wearing trousers or skirts." Before Emma could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. 3 riders appeared, all wearing Jackson Ranch colors. "Boss sent us to find you, Reed," the lead rider called out. "Storm's brewing from the north, and he wants the herd moved before it hits." Matthew stood immediately. "Mr. Walker, we'll continue this discussion another time. Thank you for the coffee, Miss Walker." He mounted his horse with practiced ease, tipping his hat toward Emma before turning to join his men. Thomas and Emma watched them ride away, dust kicking up behind their horses. "What do you make of him?" Thomas asked his daughter. Emma considered the question. "Different from what I expected. He didn't seem put off by your unconventional ways." "One civil conversation doesn't mean much, Pa," Emma replied, though she couldn't deny a slight stirring of interest. "Besides, I've got better things to worry about than what some new foreman thinks of me." Thomas chuckled. "Of course you do. But you might be seeing more of him. We agreed to work together on fixing the boundary fence next week." Emma shrugged, affecting indifference. "As long as he pulls his weight." Later that evening, as Emma prepared for bed, she found herself replaying her encounter with Matthew Reed. Unlike most men she met, he had looked her in the eye when speaking to her, had acknowledged her skills without surprise or mockery. "Doesn't matter," she told herself firmly. "One decent man doesn't change how the world works." Outside her window, the promised storm began to roll in, thunder rumbling in the distance like the uncertain future ahead. The promised storm had passed, leaving behind mud-slicked trails and swollen creeks across the valley. Emma guided her horse carefully along the property line, inspecting damage from the heavy rainfall. A section of fence near the eastern boundary had partially collapsed, creating a potential escape route for their cattle. "Just what we needed," she muttered, dismounting to examine the broken posts more closely. The repair would require additional lumber, and at least 2 people to hold the posts steady while securing them. As she knelt in the mud, examining the extent of the damage, she heard approaching hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw Matthew Reed riding toward her, leading a packhorse loaded with fence posts and tools. "Morning, Miss Walker," he called, reining his horse to a stop several yards away. "Your father mentioned this section might have taken damage in the storm." Emma stood, brushing mud from her hands. "Mr. Reed, I didn't expect to see you until next week." "Storm changed plans," he replied, dismounting with ease. Mr. Jackson figured it was in everyone's best interest to secure boundaries sooner rather than later. Emma nodded, appreciating the practicality. "Well, you've saved me a trip back to get supplies." "Happy to help," Matthew said, beginning to unload the packhorse. "Though I should warn you, I've got 3 more men coming with additional materials. Your father suggested we tackle the entire eastern boundary today." Emma felt a flicker of annoyance. "Pa didn't mention that to me." Matthew paused, tools in hand. "Is that a problem?" "No," Emma replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Just would have been nice to be included in the planning." Understanding dawned on Matthew's face. "He didn't tell you because he didn't know. This was arranged with Mr. Jackson just an hour ago. I stopped by your homestead on my way here, but your father said you'd already ridden out." The clarification eased Emma's irritation. "I see. Well, we might as well get started before your men arrive." They worked side by side, falling into an efficient rhythm. Emma was stronger than she looked, capable of driving fence posts with practiced precision. Matthew worked with quiet competence, neither offering unwanted assistance nor showing surprise at her capabilities. "You've done this before," Matthew observed during a brief water break. Emma took a long drink from her canteen before responding. "Since I was 14. After May died, Pa needed help with everything. Didn't matter that I was a girl." Matthew nodded. "My sister's the same way. Runs our family store back in Wyoming now that our parents are gone." The casual mention of a similarly capable woman caught Emma by surprise. Most men don't speak of women handling business so matter-of-factly. "Most men are fools," Matthew replied simply. Returning to work, the unexpected response brought a small smile to Emma's face as she resumed hammering. When the additional workers arrived, Emma braced herself for the usual comments or sidelong glances. Instead, Matthew introduced her as Miss Walker, who knows this property better than anyone, and seamlessly incorporated her into directing the work. By midday, they had made significant progress. During a break for the noon meal, Emma found herself sitting slightly apart from the men, a habit formed from years of keeping professional distance. To her surprise, Matthew brought his food over and sat nearby, close enough for conversation, but not so close as to seem improper. "Your cattle operation is impressive," he commented between bites. "Smaller than the Jacksons, but the quality is evident." "Pa's been selective with breeding," Emma explained, warming to the topic. "We can't compete on quantity, so we focus on quality instead." "Smart approach," Matthew agreed. "Though I imagine it's hard to manage with just the 2 of you." Emma shrugged. "We hire hands during calving and roundup. Rest of the time we make do." "And you handle the same work as any ranch hand," Matthew observed. Emma tensed, waiting for the criticism that usually followed such observations. Instead, Matthew continued, "Must have taken considerable determination to develop those skills." Despite what others thought, the simple acknowledgement, free from either criticism or excessive praise, caught Emma off guard. "Necessity is a powerful teacher," she replied after a moment. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. "And a better one then." "Convention, I'd wager." The afternoon's work proceeded smoothly. As the sun began its westward descent, the eastern boundary stood repaired and reinforced. The Jackson hands packed up their tools, preparing to head back to their ranch. "We made good time," Matthew commented, surveying their work with satisfaction. "Your father will be pleased." "Yes, he will," Emma agreed, then added with deliberate casualness, "You work well for a big ranch foreman." "Most I've known prefer giving orders to getting their hands dirty." Matthew's mouth quirked in a half-smile. I believe in leading by example. Can't expect men to respect orders from someone who won't do the same work. A surprisingly sensible philosophy, Emma remarked. I'm occasionally capable of sense, Matthew replied with understated humor. Before Emma could respond, one of the ranch hands called out to Matthew about a potential problem with one of the horses. He excused himself, leaving Emma to contemplate their conversation. As the Jackson crew prepared to depart, Matthew approached Emma once more. Mr. Jackson is hosting a gathering next Saturday, he said. Sort of a welcome for new families that have settled in the area. Your father mentioned you both received an invitation. Emma nodded reluctantly. We did. Will you be attending? Matthew asked, his tone carefully neutral. Emma rarely attended social functions where she would be expected to behave like a proper lady. I haven't decided, she answered honestly. Well, if you do come, Matthew said, mounting his horse, save a dance for me. The unexpected request left Emma momentarily speechless. Before she could recover, Matthew tipped his hat and rode away with his men, leaving her standing by the newly repaired fence with an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. That evening, as Emma helped her father with dinner preparations, Thomas brought up the subject of the Jackson gathering. Mrs. Peterson from town mentioned she's got a new dress that might suit you, he said carefully, for the Jackson party. Emma sliced bread with more force than necessary. I have perfectly adequate clothes, Pa. Of course you do, Thomas backpedaled. Just thought you might want something different for a change. Emma set down her knife. Different meaning more feminine? More suitable for finding a husband? Thomas sighed. Emma, that's not what I meant, isn't it? She challenged. Every time there's a social gathering, the same conversation emerges. Emma should wear a dress. Emma should act like a lady. Emma should find a husband before she's too old. I just want you to have options, Thomas said gently. This ranch won't sustain us forever. I worry about what will happen to you when I'm gone. The genuine concern in her father's voice softened Emma's anger. I know, Pa, but I can't pretend to be someone I'm not just to secure a future. Thomas studied his daughter's face. You seem to get along well with the Reed fellow today. Emma turned away, busying herself with the stew pot. He's reasonable to work with. High praise coming from you, Thomas observed with a hint of amusement. Emma shot him a warning look. Don't read too much into professional courtesy, Pa. Wouldn't dream of it, Thomas replied, though his eyes twinkled. Though I did notice. He asked about you when he stopped by this morning. Despite her best efforts, Emma felt heat rising to her cheeks. Probably just wondering if I knew how to repair fence line. Thomas hummed noncommittally. Whatever you say, daughter. Later that night, Emma stood before the small mirror in her bedroom, critically examining her reflection. Her face was tanned from long days under the sun, her hands calloused from years of ranch work. The few dresses she owned hung unused in the corner of her wardrobe. With hesitant fingers, she reached out and touched the fabric of the least outdated one, a simple blue dress her father had purchased for her last Christmas, which she had worn exactly once. This is foolish, she told herself firmly, turning away from both the mirror and the dress. One civil man doesn't change who you are or what this world expects. Yet as she blew out her lamp and settled into bed, Matthew's words echoed in her mind. Save a dance for me. The most confusing part wasn't the invitation itself, but her own unexpected desire to accept it. The Jackson Ranch stood impressively against the Montana twilight, lanterns illuminating the path to the main house where music and laughter spilled from open windows. Emma sat rigid beside her father in their wagon, her hands fidgeting with the unfamiliar fabric of her blue dress. You look lovely, Thomas said gently, noticing her discomfort. Emma gave him a strained smile. I feel like I'm wearing a costume. We don't have to stay long, he promised as he guided the wagon toward the hitching posts, where other vehicles were already lined up. Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself. It's fine, Pa, I'm just being prickly. In truth, she had spent the past week alternating between deciding not to attend at all and, more alarmingly, finding herself wondering if Matthew Reed would really seek her out for a dance. The internal conflict was both unfamiliar and irritating. As Thomas helped her down from the wagon, Emma's hand automatically reached to adjust a gun belt that wasn't there. The absence of its weight made her feel oddly vulnerable. "The Walkers!" Mrs. Jackson exclaimed as they entered, hurrying over with practiced hospitality. "Thomas, how wonderful you could join us. And Emma, my dear, that color is divine on you." Emma forced a polite smile, accepting the woman's air kisses with rigid tolerance. "Thank you for inviting us, Mrs. Jackson." Of course. We have several new families in attendance tonight. Opportunity for fresh acquaintances." Mrs. Jackson's meaningful glance wasn't lost on Emma, who resisted the urge to roll her eyes. As Mrs. Jackson led them further into the gathering, Emma scanned the room, telling herself she wasn't looking for anyone in particular. The large parlor was crowded with the county's ranching families, merchants from town, and indeed several unfamiliar faces that must belong to the newcomers. "Emma Walker in a dress, now there's a rare sight," came a familiar voice. Emma turned to find Sarah Miller, the shopkeeper's daughter and one of the few women in town who treated Emma with genuine friendliness. "Don't get used to it," Emma replied with a wry smile. "By tomorrow, I'll be back in trousers," Sarah laughed. "At least you can wear either convincingly. I'd look ridiculous trying to ride astride in breeches." Their conversation was interrupted as the small orchestra in the corner struck up a lively tune, and couples began moving to the cleared area for dancing. "Miss Walker." The deep voice behind her sent an involuntary shiver down Emma's spine. She turned to find Matthew Reed standing there, looking almost unfamiliar in a clean suit rather than work clothes. "Mr. Reed," she acknowledged, hoping her voice sounded steadier than it felt. "You decided to come," he observed. "Apparently so," Emma replied, suddenly conscious of Sarah watching their exchange with undisguised interest. Matthew's eyes took in her appearance, his expression warming. "Blue suits you." Before Emma could formulate a response that wouldn't betray her inexplicable nervousness, Matthew extended his hand. "I believe you owe me a dance," he said, the hint of a question in his tone giving her space to refuse. Emma hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I suppose I did agree to that." As Matthew led her to the dance floor, Emma was acutely aware of the glances and whispers following them. The Walker girl dancing. The Walker girl in a dress. The Walker girl with the Jackson foreman. "Everyone's staring," she muttered as Matthew turned to face her, taking her right hand in his left and placing his other hand properly at her waist. "Let them," he replied simply. "Though I suspect they're admiring how well you clean up," Emma snorted softly. "More likely betting on how quickly I'll step on your toes. I should warn you, dancing isn't among my practice skills." A smile played at the corner of Matthew's mouth. "Just follow my lead. It's not so different from horsemanship, balance, and rhythm." As they began to move with the music, Emma found herself concentrating fiercely on the steps. Matthew guided her with subtle pressure, his movements confident without being controlling. "You're doing fine," he assured her after she narrowly avoided a misstep. "Better than fine." "Now you're just being kind," Emma replied. "Not a quality I'm generally accused of," Matthew said with a hint of amusement. "Ask any of the hands who work under me." Their conversation flowed more easily than Emma had expected as they continued dancing. Matthew asked about her experiences growing up on the ranch, listening with genuine interest to her answers without the condescension she usually encountered. Most men would have steered this conversation toward more conventional topics by now. Emma observed as the song drew to a close. "I'm not most men," Matthew replied simply. "No," Emma agreed, surprising herself. "You're not." The evening progressed more pleasantly than Emma had anticipated. She and Matthew shared 2 more dances, interspersed with conversations that ranged from cattle breeding practices to books they had read. During a break while Matthew fetched them both punch, Emma found herself cornered by Harriet Wilkins, the banker's wife and self-appointed guardian of propriety in Pinecrest. "My dear Emma," Mrs. Wilkins began with honeyed condescension, "how lovely to see you embracing femininity for a change." Emma's smile tightened. "Just a change of uniform for the evening, Mrs. Wilkins," the older woman tittered. "Such a unique perspective. Though I must say, Mr. Reed seems quite taken with you. Perhaps there's hope for a proper match after all." "Mr. Reed and I have a professional relationship," Emma stated firmly. "He works with my father on ranch matters." Mrs. Wilkins raised a knowing eyebrow. "Professional relationships have a way of evolving, dear, and you're not getting any younger." Emma was formulating a cutting response when Matthew returned, handing her a cup of punch before addressing Mrs. Wilkins with cool politeness. "Mrs. Wilkins, I hope you're enjoying the evening." "Immensely," the woman replied, her assessing gaze moving between them. "I was just commenting to Emma how nice it is to see her taking an interest in social gatherings." "Miss Walker's interests are remarkably diverse," Matthew replied smoothly. "Something I find admirable in anyone, man or woman." Mrs. Wilkins's smile faltered slightly at his pointed response. "Yes, well, diversity of interest is certainly modern." She excused herself with a tight nod. When she was out of earshot, Emma released a controlled breath. "Thank you for the rescue." "Seemed like you were holding your own," Matthew observed. "But I've had my fill of Mrs. Wilkins's particular brand of conversation at previous gatherings." "She means well," Emma conceded reluctantly, in her narrow-minded way. "The road to social suffocation is paved with well-meaning interference," Matthew remarked dryly. The unexpected witticism startled a genuine laugh from Emma, drawing more curious glances from nearby guests. As the evening drew to a close, Emma found herself surprisingly reluctant to leave. The night had been a revelation, not because she had suddenly discovered a love for social gatherings, but because Matthew's company had made navigating the event not merely tolerable but enjoyable. "I should find my father," she said finally, setting down her empty punch cup. Matthew nodded. "May I walk you out?" Outside, the night air was cool and clear, stars brilliant in the vast Montana sky. They found Thomas already at the wagon, exchanging final words with Mr. Jackson. "Ah, there you are," Thomas called upon seeing them. "Ready to head home, Emma?" "Yes, Pa," she replied, then turned to Matthew. "Thank you for the dances, Mr. Reed." "The pleasure was mine, Miss Walker," he responded, his voice carrying a warmth that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. As Thomas helped her into the wagon, Matthew added, "I'll be riding out to check the north boundary line tomorrow. Your father mentioned there might be a washed-out section near your property." "There is," Emma confirmed, understanding the implicit question. "I was planning to inspect it in the morning." "Perhaps we could combine efforts," Matthew suggested casually. Thomas, settling into the driver's seat, answered before Emma could. "Excellent idea. Emma knows that section better than anyone." As they drove away, Emma resisted the urge to look back, though she could feel Matthew's gaze following their departure. "He seems like a good man," Thomas commented once they were out of earshot. Emma kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "He's competent at his job." Thomas hummed knowingly. "Is that why you danced with him 3 times? "I was being polite," Emma insisted, though the excuse sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Of course," Thomas agreed, barely concealing a smile. "Very professional of you." Emma fell silent, her thoughts in unusual turmoil. She had spent years defining herself in opposition to the town's expectations, taking pride in her independence and practical skills. The possibility that she might actually enjoy a man's company, and not just any man, but one who seemed to value rather than merely tolerate her unconventional ways, was unsettling. Later, alone in her bedroom, Emma carefully hung up the blue dress. Her fingers lingered on the fabric, remembering the feeling of Matthew's hand at her waist, the surprising ease of their conversation, the way his eyes had held genuine respect when they looked at her. "This changes nothing," she told her reflection firmly. "One pleasant evening doesn't rewrite the world." Yet as she blew out her lamp and settled into bed, Emma found herself looking forward to the morning ride with an anticipation that had nothing to do with fence inspection and everything to do with the man she would meet there. Dawn broke clear and bright over the Montana landscape as Emma saddled her horse. She had risen earlier than necessary, taking unusual care with her appearance, not enough to draw comment from her father, but enough that she felt slightly foolish for the effort. "Just checking fence line," she muttered to herself as she tightened the cinch. "Not attending another dance." Thomas appeared from the barn, leading his own horse. "Beautiful morning for a ride," he observed casually. Emma shot him a suspicious look. "I thought you were staying behind to repair the chicken coop." "Changed my mind," Thomas replied with affected innocence. "That north boundary needs looking at, and 3 sets of eyes are better than 2. "Pa," Emma began warningly. Thomas raised his hands in surrender. "Can't a father ride out with his daughter without ulterior motives?" Emma's skeptical expression made it clear she wasn't convinced, but she mounted her horse without further argument. They set off toward the north boundary, the morning air crisp against their faces. Matthew was already waiting when they arrived, sitting easily on his horse as he surveyed the creek that formed the natural boundary between the properties. He raised a hand in greeting as they approached. "Morning," he called. "Hope I haven't kept you waiting." "Just arrived ourselves," Thomas replied cheerfully, dismounting. "Creek's running higher than usual for this time of year." Emma remained on her horse a moment longer, using the opportunity to observe Matthew unnoticed. In the clear morning light, away from the artificial constraints of the Jackson gathering, he looked more like himself, capable, alert, at home in the outdoors. When his eyes met hers, the genuine warmth in them made her chest tighten inexplicably. "Miss Walker," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "You look well this morning." Emma dismounted, hoping the physical activity would hide the unexpected flush in her cheeks. "Mr. Reed, thank you for suggesting this joint inspection." They spent the next hour walking the boundary line, identifying places where the recent storm had caused damage. Thomas, despite his proclaimed interest in the task, frequently found reasons to examine areas slightly removed from where Emma and Matthew were working, his transparent attempts at providing them privacy both irritating and endearing to his daughter. "Your father isn't particularly subtle," Matthew observed quietly as Thomas wandered off to inspect a distant section of the creek bank. Emma sighed. "No, subtlety has never been his strong suit." A comfortable silence fell between them as they checked a particularly eroded section of bank where the creek had nearly breached its natural channel. "This will need reinforcing before the next heavy rain," Matthew noted, kneeling to examine the soil composition. Emma nodded in agreement. "We could use stone from the eastern ridge. It's hard work hauling it, but it would provide better protection than just earth." "Good thinking," Matthew approved. "I can bring a team tomorrow if that suits." "I'll help," Emma offered automatically. "I know where the best stone can be found." Matthew studied her face. "I have no doubt you're more than capable, but it's backbreaking work." Emma's expression cooled. "And you think I'm too delicate for it? That I should leave it to the men?" "That's not what I said," Matthew replied evenly. "I meant it's hard labor for anyone, regardless of gender. Even with a full team, it's a grueling day's work." The simple logic of his response deflated Emma's defensive reaction. "I'm sorry. I'm too used to having to prove myself." Matthew nodded understanding. "No apology needed. Though for what it's worth, you've nothing to prove to me." The simple statement, delivered without flourish or expectation of gratitude, affected Emma more deeply than any compliment she had ever received. Before she could respond, Thomas called from further along the bank, waving them over to examine something he had found. As they walked toward him, Matthew spoke quietly. "I enjoyed our dances last night." Emma glanced at him, searching for the teasing or condescension she habitually expected from men, but found only sincerity. "As did I," she admitted. "More than I anticipated." "High praise," Matthew replied with a slight smile. "Though I suspect social gatherings aren't your preferred pastime. What gave it away?" Emma asked dryly. Just an educated guess, Matthew answered, his eyes crinkling with humor. Though you adapt remarkably well for someone who'd rather be elsewhere. They reached Thomas, who was pointing out a beaver dam that had contributed to the altered water flow. As they discussed solutions, Emma found herself repeatedly aware of Matthew's presence beside her, not in a distracting way, but as a steady, competent ally in the work at hand. When they had completed the boundary inspection, Thomas announced he needed to return to the ranch early to meet a feed supplier, leaving Emma and Matthew to finish marking the areas that would need attention. Subtle as a stampede, Emma muttered as her father rode away. Matthew chuckled. He cares about you. Too much, sometimes, Emma replied, though her tone was affectionate rather than truly annoyed. They worked companionably for another hour, falling into an easy rhythm. When they finally stopped to rest, sitting on a fallen log overlooking the creek, Matthew broke the comfortable silence. May I speak frankly, Miss Walker? Emma tensed slightly but nodded. I prefer frankness to flattery. Matthew turned to face her more directly. I've developed a great respect for you over these past weeks. Your skill, your determination, your unwillingness to conform merely for the sake of others' comfort. Emma blinked, surprised by the directness of his words. That's not what men usually respect in a woman. I'm not concerned with what other men value, Matthew replied simply. I know my own mind. A strange fluttering sensation took residence in Emma's chest. And what is your mind telling you, Mr. Reed? That I'd like to call on you properly, he answered, his steady gaze never leaving her face. Not just for ranch business or chance encounters. Emma's throat felt suddenly dry. You realize what people would say? The respectable foreman and the wild Walker girl? Let them talk, Matthew said dismissively. Their opinions matter far less to me than your answer. Emma studied him, searching for any hint of insincerity or hidden agenda. Why me? There are plenty of proper young ladies in town who would be more suitable. Suitable by whose standards? Matthew countered. I don't want a proper young lady who measures her worth by social conventions. I want a partner who knows her own value. The word partner hung in the air between them, weighted with significance. I've never thought of myself as anyone's partner, Emma admitted. I've been too busy proving I don't need a man to complete my life. And you don't, Matthew agreed readily. Which is precisely why I'm asking. You choose from strength, not necessity. Emma found herself momentarily speechless, unaccustomed to having her independence framed as an asset rather than an impediment to romance. I'm not asking for an answer today, Matthew continued when she remained silent. Just permission to call on you and see where this might lead. Emma took a deep breath, sorting through the unfamiliar emotions churning within her. You should. No, I have no intention of becoming someone different. I won't stop riding astride or working the ranch or speaking my mind. I would be disappointed if you did, Matthew replied, a smile warming his eyes. Those are the qualities that drew me to you in the first place. The simple honesty of his response melted something long frozen within Emma's chest. Then yes, Mr. Reed, you may call on me. The smile that spread across Matthew's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. I'm glad to hear it, Miss Walker. As they mounted their horses to return to their respective ranches, Emma felt as though she was seeing the familiar landscape through new eyes. Nothing had changed in the rolling hills and vast sky, yet everything seemed somehow different. I'll bring the stone-hauling team tomorrow at first light, Matthew said as they reached the point where their paths would diverge. I'll be ready, Emma promised. Matthew hesitated, then added with quiet certainty. This doesn't change who you are, Emma. It just adds something new to who you might become. As she watched him ride away, Emma realized he had used her given name. For the first time. The sound of it in his voice lingered in her mind as she turned her horse toward home. When she arrived at the ranch, Thomas was waiting on the porch, trying and failing to appear casual about her return. How was the rest of the inspection? He asked too innocently. Emma dismounted, giving him a knowing look. Informative. And Reed? He's a capable hand with boundary issues. Very capable, Emma replied, unable to completely suppress a smile. In fact, he'll be bringing a team tomorrow to help with the stone. Reinforcement. Thomas's eyebrows rose hopefully. Will he now? Any other developments I should know about? Emma led her horse toward the barn, calling over her shoulder. He asked permission to call on me. I said yes. Thomas's whoop of delight followed her into the barn, making her shake her head even as her smile widened. That evening, as Emma sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples, she contemplated the unexpected turn her life had taken. She had spent so many years defining herself by what she wasn't, not conventional, not marriageable, not willing to compromise, that she had never fully considered what she might be, a woman capable of partnership without surrender, of connection without loss of self. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. A single rider approached in the fading light. Matthew, returning unannounced. Emma stood as he dismounted and climbed the porch steps. I forgot to ask something important, he said without preamble. What's that? Emma asked, curious at his earnest expression. Would you ride out with me on Sunday? There's a place up in the foothills I'd like to show you. We could pack a lunch. The simple request, not to attend a social function or meet him in town, but to ride together in the open country they both loved, touched Emma deeply. I'd like that very much, she replied. Matthew's smile in the fading light was both tender and respectful. Until tomorrow, then. As he rode away into the gathering dusk, Emma remained on the porch, a newfound sense of possibility expanding within her. The town might still whisper that she was too wild to marry, but for the first time, Emma found herself unconcerned with their judgment. She had found someone who didn't want to tame her wildness but ride alongside it, and that made all the difference.